Welcome to Nonprofit Thrive, a podcast where we learn from the humans who are helping nonprofits succeed in the digital world. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome. I'm Ben Freda, host of this show where we share the stories of leaders in the nonprofit space, people behind the organizations, foundations, companies that help nonprofits change the world on the web. This is our third episode, only third episode. In the past, we've had our first episode, Ryan Osmick from Soapbox Engage, talk to us about CRMs and how sometimes the best CRMs are just a spreadsheet. And we also spoke with Jacob Wunsch of Media Law Resource Center, who told us some cool stuff about how to create an daily email for his membership, which seemed to me crazy hearing it, but they do a daily email for their membership, and it gets like a 50% open rate, which blew my mind. So check that out if you get a chance. We have an even better, I'm going to say, guest for today, somebody who I absolutely love. Before we get into her story, I need to tell you that the podcast is sponsored by BFC Digital, which, big surprise, is where I work. At BFC Digital, we help nonprofits thrive on the web. If you are a nonprofit communications staff member who's responsible for your organization's web presence, you probably know all the great stuff you can do on the web to further your mission and improve the world. But you probably also know how frustrating, weird, difficult, buggy, strange web technology can be. At BFC Digital, our job is to help you succeed without all of that pain. So we can handle everything from smallest bugs and issues you're having you need to fix, all the way to strategizing, designing, building out large web projects. Go to bfcdigital.com/podcast and get information about how we might be able to help you. With that said, today I'm super psyched to have Emily Culbertson on the show. I met Emily maybe 5 years or so ago on a extremely interesting project, which we might get into. I've been looking forward to bringing her on since this podcast was just a gleam, a sparkle in my eye. Emily is a digital strategist based outside of Chicago. She helps nonprofits plan and run web projects, and also, and this is the fun part, dives in and gets projects that are on fire out of trouble. So as you can tell, this is going to be a fun one. Emily, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here today.
Cool. So let's start sort of, before we get into the juicy stuff, let's just start with you. I mean, where did you start? How did you start your career? And now I know you're working on your own. How did you end up making that transition? That'll sort of give folks a little context.
Sure. So I am one of those people who did not take a particularly traditional route toward anything. So I ended up actually taking a break from going to school full time and began a career in journalism back when that was a slightly more palatable or easy thing to do, given the state of, unfortunately, the journalism universe. So I began my career as a newspaper reporter and wire service reporter covering federal courts.
I did not know that. That is really cool.
It was awesome. The AP is as strong as its weakest member, and I learned a lot from that job, and I'm apologizing to all my editors. But, so I covered state and federal court for about 3 years, but I needed a job that would allow me to pay for tuition.
Sure.
And so in proof that it is who you know, my best friend, Alex Schwartz, introduced me to the people at the University of Pennsylvania Health System, where I got a worker bee job doing communications for a hospital system. And I was part of a 4-person team who built our first website in 1997.
Wow. You're talking about the first website for the organization ever.
Yeah. So there was a med school website that my colleague Chris Converse built. And then 4 of us built a website for the university, for the health system, for the hospital. Wow. At that point, the hospital had 1 to 2 other hospitals and a whole group of clinical practices. And those were the days. You may remember those days. That was Dreamweaver, and I did a lot of hand coding of HTML.
Oh,
and
sure.
all of the content management tools that we had apart from that were built into a web browser. And if I wanted breaks in certain things, I had to hand code line breaks into the code.
Oh, yeah. So,
yeah,
and
those were the days.
You were not trained as a coder, right? Like you were coming at it from the communication side, which is, I mean, I would say 90% of the people we work with, no one's trained as a coder, right? We kind of end up in the nonprofit world and we kind of have to dive in and learn that BR stands for break, which you kind of did.
Yes,
so you got your feet wet with even coding stuff during that time.
Yeah. I mean, we really all kind of had to be there were two of us who were writers and editors, and I guess now we would call ourselves project managers, but mostly what we were doing was client management with the hospital departments and the physicians and things like that. And then two designer developers. We had the support of the IT team at the School of Medicine, and a server that was like in a basement rack someplace. Like it's a very different time.
Totally.
Yes, it was different. Yeah.
But that is such a good learning experience too. I mean, you're diving in, at this point, after doing that, what, HTML is, what CSS is, what JavaScript is. So you probably, at least as you go through your career up till now, you know what people are talking about. You can talk to developers, you can talk to content people. I mean, do you feel like that was good for understanding later?
Yes, no, it absolutely is. It is good to have a generalist role in something like that. It's really crazy. Like, I saw my first sitemap because my boss took a directory of medical services that we printed, like the phone book, and basically took that book apart and organized all of the content. Now we would call that a sitemap or a site index.
Right.
Now it's just the structure that the pages needed to be. So there were whole fields that existed in software development or in IT that had not really come to the web yet.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I was at HUP for doing this type of digital work for almost 4 years, and then went to do agency work. And as you can imagine, agency work is, I worked at a Philadelphia agency called Eyesight, and they specialized in pharma and in consumer products and in a whole bunch of nutritional stuff. That was when I discovered that people normally assign those things to roles, that there was like project manager and someone who did information architecture and someone who did design as a specific deliverable. That was all new to me. It was that structure of how you ran things through projects was a different discipline than when you're managing really quite large, like multiple pages. Like, there were thousands of pages on this website. The physician directory had 800 at least physicians in it. You really learn how quickly you can get in over your head, unfortunately.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yes. And you learn, was it Paul Ford who said, the web is a customer service medium, and why wasn't I consulted? 100 physicians are looking at their profiles. You learn really quickly what is important and what people pay attention to.
Yeah, right. Oh, physicians are looking at their profiles. Yeah, that's funny. Yes. That's the most important page to them, is their page on the site.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know if you agree with this, but one of the things we always do when we're building new sites is we try and start the very beginning, sort of changing the focus from who the organization is and what they're trying, like who the nonprofit is, to what the users are trying to do. You know what I mean? And it's
Absolutely.
a hard, when you're planning out what's supposed to happen, you really want to think about your users, like what they're looking for, what they need. You may need to raise $200,000 this month, or you may need to promote such and such event. And so you need to do that. But if you just put, it's hard to get engagement if it's really all about your needs. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe I'm not explaining this right.
You're absolutely right. And actually, we have a really great story from those years at Penn to talk about that. So when the team was, and I really want to stress how much this work is all teamwork. And, it's really easy to use I statements, but there is no sustainable web presence without a team. There are occasional acts of solo superheroism, but it's really it's a team sport and a team project. So we built out a contact us page on our website.
Okay.
And when it was envisioned, it was, oh, people are going to write and ask us how we built this thing that was so cool and how does this style work and whatever. You know
Sure.
what we didn't expect? 40 appointment requests a day.
Oh, of course, because that's what the users were thinking. That's what the users needed. They didn't need
Yes.
to tell you how cool your website was.
No, they were like, I can schedule an appointment this way. And
Yeah.
so
That's such a good example. Such a good example.
Yeah, we really had to pivot quite quickly. And I know I feel like all of my stories are old because I'm like the old lady of the internet, but it was really surprising. We needed to build a partnership. My colleagues really took the lead on this, build a partnership with our appointment center and coach people through what the similarities and the differences were in terms of handling people's appointment requests online versus handling them in a phone call. But we were the catchment basement for any number of customer service concerns that people had. Healthcare is notoriously complex and fragmented, and it's hard for people to get answers. And we became an outlet for people to do that, and also for people to reach out in situations where they just felt like they had no way to turn. People who were looking for healthcare providers who would respect their different parts of their medical background. Someone contacted us. Again, I want to remind you, this was 1999 and 2000, who was trans and wanted our help in finding affirming healthcare. People participated in chats with us who were having chest pains, and we had to track them down and tell them to call. That they had to call 911. I mean, it was a really, really wide open time, and we learned a lot of things very, very quickly.
That's really interesting. And just keeping in mind that the people that are going to come to the site are going to have a need. You know, they're going to have a need. And what's that need? We just did a project over the summer for an organization called the Child Abuse Centers of Texas. And they are an organization. I've got to have the guy on that we worked with. He's a fascinating guy. But they're an organization that helps manage staff and initiatives at the individual child abuse centers in Texas. So if a parent brings in a child, it's where a parent or a caregiver can bring in a child who might have been abused. It's a terrible subject and difficult to talk about, but the care gets taken care of at the individual centers, but their organization is meant to coordinate all of them. So they don't do any patient, inpatient intake stuff. They don't handle that. But we knew that, man, people are going to Google this and they're going to think, oh my God, something's happened to my family and they're going to need help like immediately, and they're going to come and they're going to fill out the contact us. You know what I mean? Like they're just going to do that. And even no matter how much we say on the website, hey, this is a non-emergency thing. If you want to go to emergency thing, you got to go here. People are going to do that. So we had to think about all right, when that does happen, what are we going to do? So we designed some things that would help direct them to the right place. But it's a great example. I mean, you can have all these wants and desires of what you want to impart, but it's the people that are coming there that are going to determine, how it actually gets used, what their needs are. Anyway.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are listening and not watching, I've been aggressively nodding this whole time. It could not be more true. People will find any door and walk in and ask for help, and be prepared, I guess, is all I can say. We're lucky that you guys were thinking about that.
Yeah. And, well, that's just from, not thinking about it in the past and learning lessons. Okay. So let's talk. One thing you mentioned was just the team, right? Like the fact that building a project like this is a team. And I know that's one of your areas of expertise, is running web projects, which is, by the way, an incredibly tricky thing to do well. Can you talk, can you talk a little bit about how you got into that more? I mean, I knew you worked with Robert Wood Johnson and stuff after that, doing that role. But then I would also like to talk about your experiences doing that, things you've learned to do, things you've learned not to do, anything like that.
Sure. So I was at Penn and at Hupp for 4 or 5 years, somewhere in there. LinkedIn will know better than I do at this point. And then I went and did agency work for a couple of years. And I was really fortunate that one of my agency clients was Catherine Thomas, who at that point was at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and had been my boss at Penn. I owe I cannot talk about my career without mentioning that I owe Catherine 2 jobs and a husband, although she is fortunately happily married, and so she doesn't have to pay up on that. But Catherine at that point Catherine was at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. She was part of just a really extraordinarily talented communications team. And I had done work for her and for one of her programs. And she said, "Hey, we're hiring. Are you interested? Do you know anyone who's interested?" That's the line. You don't want someone to apply, so you ask if they know of someone else. And so, "Hey, I'm interested." And I was really fortunate that I was able to come in there. And I was there. I was at RWJF as a staffer for, I think, just under 4 years. One of those years, I was supposed to be a remote employee, but I was actually in Princeton more than I was in Minnesota.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was before ubiquitous video monitoring.
Yep.
I spent a lot of time on WebEx on the phone and screen sharing doing work.
Yeah.
But during that time, again, team sport, I was extremely blessed and fortunate to work with just a really outstanding team of colleagues and with digital agencies, because in that time, we redesigned the website a couple of times as part of strategic needs for the organization. We did a whole bunch of usability interviews where we were blessed to be able to sit down with people who worked on Capitol Hill, people who wanted to apply for grants, people who are researchers, and say to them those questions that you and I were talking about. Like, well, what are you looking for? How do you evaluate if this website is what you need, if the information is fair, if the information is easy to scan? We really had the opportunity to kind of get to know what people were looking for. And so that was an incredibly formative experience in my career. We moved to Chicago in fall of 2008. And at that point, my father was in hospice care, and I did not think it was a good idea to look for a job. And so I was like, "Oh, I'll do this consulting thing. And I can, put some client work together, and that will give me some flexibility to be a caregiver for my dad." And he unfortunately passed away 2 months after we moved here. And it is, 15 years later, and I am still hanging out at Shingle doing this work. But it's, as you know, consulting and being on the outside and brought in really allows you to see a variety of projects. You get called in. Yeah. No two contexts are the same. No two organizations come with the same level of experience or point of view or goals. Thing. And definitely not budget. And so my hope is that I can learn from the best of all of those circumstances and try to bring that to my clients. And I just feel really grateful because my clients have been truly amazing people to work with, change makers across a bunch of fields, and hopefully are out there making the world safer, healthier, more beautiful, more everything.
Yeah, totally. So when you do, and I know you do two things for clients, you help them with big projects, and you also sort of do triage, like we talked about. You mentioned usability testing. Do you try and do that at the beginning of most of the projects you work with, or is that mostly down to what the budget is, whether or not you have time or budget to spend interviewing people?
So it really depends. There have been projects where I've been really fortunate to be able to go out and do almost like brand interviews, which I have to tell you, I feel very kind of over my skis. Like when I have those conversations, and I hope that I am always like delivering at the level that I promise, because talking to people about their experiences with an organization is kind of a, I hate to say sacred undertaking. I don't want to undersell that, but it's really important. People are trusting you with like, well, this is my experience with the organization, both the good or the things that might look good in one context that don't look good in another. Because I think it's really important, as we were talking about, how the brand is how other people see you. The brand is not always how you want to be perceived. So sometimes I get the opportunity to either do or help facilitate that in the beginning. But I've had one longstanding client that's one of many foundations that has done limited life, and so they're out of business. Where I was fortunate enough that they did interviews with target users sort of on a regular cadence. They did them kind of in the beginning or in the early stages of particular projects, but then they had the ability to go back as they were evolving or tweaking either the website or the content they were developing in order to be able to say, and I hope that I'm compressing many, many years work into a small thing. So I hope that I'm the top level kind of describing the sequence, but it's really valuable to be able to go back and say, what would you be looking for? Did this meet your need? How could it meet your need better? And talk about that. It was a real gift to be able to do that work.
So you would basically bring people in and sort of have that first. So it happens over a series of time, right? Like a sort of unfolding time. So like you bring them into the beginning and you say you have a series of questions, and then you develop something, or are you showing them like designs? Or are you showing them content? Like what would you actually develop in between?
So there were very few times where we were talking to the exact same person over and over again. It would be kind of mix of people. Sometimes it would be the same person over and over again, but you do want to try to, when you can, kind of make sure you're hearing from like a broad group of stakeholders. But yeah, I mean, sometimes people would see, and this is true across any number of projects I've done. Sometimes you will show people like some type of comp or some type of like clickable prototype. Right. And you say, okay, if you're going to come to website X, what would you expect to see? And you take notes about what they're saying, and then you show it to them, and you're like, okay, well, try to use this. And then you see what they click on and where they go on the prototype. Yeah. And then you're like, okay, well, talk to us about this experience. What were you expecting? What were you not expecting? So it's a combination of interview and then like watching people do stuff, like watching people is so valuable. And sometimes it's like, okay, you'll make tweaks and you'll show it to a group of people again. But the one thing that I will say, and I'm sure that both you and your clients have probably experienced this, people want to please moderators so much, right? So they will try to do something they can't do long past when they would give up on it in real life.
Because you know how long in my private life, how long I tried doing something that's hard? Like a split second. You know, like if it's hard,
you're like, I'm gone. Yeah. This is
if it's hard. Like hard to book a flight, I'm like, screw it. I'm gonna use the other airline. You know what I mean? Like,
you're just like, I'm done. This is over. So I think it's one of those things that's really important. Like I have facilitated some testing, and then I have had the privilege of partnering with other people who facilitated testing. And every facilitator has a slightly different style about how they approach that, because some facilitators are like, go, have at it. And you learn, you really have to be like watching both the screen and the user, and the user's like slowly turning red. Like, this is really hard. Or the user's like slowly lighting up because they're like, oh yeah, this is what I wanted to know. But it is often important to kind of go back and get people to try to put into words to articulate what it is that they saw. And I was really fortunate in that when we were doing more complicated systems like searches and browsers and things like that, it's like users will often spitball a solution, but the UX people who are sitting beside you are like, yeah, that's great, but I think I can take this feedback and the feedback of the 4 other people I heard from today and craft a solution that kind of works for everybody and does whatever. So it's like the users will always want to help you fix your interface, but that's data. That's like not always as descriptive as they might think.
Yeah, I find that too. I find that people can articulate very clearly what they want or need, and can articulate very clearly what the difficulty is, but have a lot more trouble having a solution. You know, it's almost, it's hard to imagine a solution. And with technology too, everything you imagine has downstream effects. You know, like I was just talking to a client today, and they're like, well, let's toss a search bar up on the top of the website, which they totally should do because their website doesn't have any search, which is silly. But hey, let's just do that, right? That's a 15-minute thing. You can just toss that up there, right? But then you think, all right, I mean, you can toss the search bar up there, but then there's a search results page, right? Like that has to look like, what's that going to look like, and how's that going to function, and how the results going to come back, and we might have to style that so the style is consistent with the rest of the site. So there's always, you know, I feel often when people spitball solutions, it's cool and helpful, but a lot of times there's a lot that, you know, that follows in from that.
Oh yeah. And then it's like, let me introduce you to that metadata you hadn't been looking at before now, because suddenly that is the population of your results page.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah. All these downstream things, which are all really important. Like I am the type of person who will lose sleep and contact a website publisher in the middle of the night because they use their website data to populate a Facebook ad and the metadata is wrong.
What do you mean? What do you mean? What's an example?
So there was metadata describing the capabilities of a facility. I really don't want to talk about this anything more specifically because it has to do with there's a member of my family who's involved with the facility, and I might as well just say it. So it's a hospital that my husband works for. And
Gotcha.
One of the golden rules of that I keep trying to emphasize to my husband is you can never go to the marketing department and say, my wife works in marketing. Like they will never, ever take you seriously. Like the path to failure. And so, but it was like they had borrowed metadata from the main hospital's description of a certain facility and not actually what it was, which makes sense. If you copied a template and you moved it over to the facility. Sure. And so I wrote to them and I was just like, you're using this data and it's showing up on my Facebook ad, but it's not actually accurate to your organization. Like at 2 a.m, like a maniac. Like
that is. It's definitely what you should be doing at 2 a.m, right?
I know. I really should be asleep. And like I can't even believe I'm telling this story. This is you're just gonna have to listen later and determine if I sound like crazy or actually crazy. But that's the type of thing. Like it is incredible how the smallest decision on a website platform can have the biggest consequences that you don't see until 18 and a half weeks later at 3 a.m.
Yeah. So when you think about how to plan a project and run a project, is that one of the things you're trying to do? Are you kind of frantically trying to catch all of the things at the beginning that might be a problem later? Or do you instead schedule a large process for testing at the end? I mean, what's sort of the optimal way to run these things in your view?
So there are obviously multiple ways of doing this, but when I am tasked with helping a client kind of think about how big a website is, a website project that they're doing, I really try to grab all the things that, at least in my experience, can create complications at the end. And you and I know this well. This is my infomercial. If you guys are not working with Ben, you should, because oftentimes, like, your integrations are the places like, well, what can go wrong? Well, your integration with your CRM could go wrong. Your integration with a learning management system, your integration with like an email collection tool. If you're using third-party search, all of those places where you're integrating someplace else, that's what can go wrong.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's one of the things that I try to help my clients kind of sketch out and shape and say, all right, well, who needs to be at the table so we can like plan up front and test at the end? Because it's a both and thing, right? The second thing I try to think about is stakeholders. I really try to think about when you're a client in your client organization and you're the project manager and you're the person who's charged to do this, who has the power to say no to what you're doing? And so that becomes a role of who as a project manager are you accountable to? Who needs to be informed about major decisions? Who do you need to make sure is in agreement about goals, strategies, the timeline, the budget? Who sort of needs to be like managed up in a process?
Interesting. Okay.
And then and then also just sort of who are sort of the lateral stakeholders who contribute content, contribute function, contribute. I think when I think about this from a foundation standpoint, like no two foundations are the same. If you know one foundation, you know one foundation. But generally, people are like, there's someone like me would be working with who's usually in communications, and they have like peer stakeholders, like in a program team and a research team. They have a stakeholder in like the people who manage the process of applying for grants, and have like a technology stakeholder who has opinions about what the content management system is, where the hosting is, what the security looks like, all of that. And so oftentimes, and foundations, I think, are especially complex. Nonprofits probably, no two nonprofits kind of function. But those roles, you really want to think about those roles and like, who is the content manager? Who's the subject matter expert of content? Who needs to weigh in on that? Who needs to weigh in on how the brand is presented online? And so it's really, I write a lot of RFPs, which kind of makes me the enemy, right? I spend a lot of time on these 3 paragraphs that I include called working with the project team. So who's the project manager? Who's the sponsor? Who is going to be expected to weigh in? And when my work is effective, the goal is that somewhere behind that paragraph is a commonly understood structure for how disagreement will get worked out. It doesn't always work out that way, but the thought is, this is the project manager, this is the sponsor, here are the people who are consulted, but here are the people who ultimately have to own the final decision because they are accountable for the completion of the project.
And that goes right in the RFP at the start.
I try, man. I try. Firms need to know how firms, I firmly believe firms need to know who the client actually is. If I can advocate for one thing for my clients in terms of being good clients, it's about being honest about who you are. Describe reality. If it is important to get 3 people to sign off and they meet every 2 weeks and that's the best and only time to get them, build it into the project.
For sure. For sure. That's really interesting. And that's something I've really focused on. Do you think, and this is sort of a side question, but I've seen a lot of talk recently about how RFPs may not be the best way for organizations to go about selecting a vendor or selecting someone to help them. Do you believe that? Do you believe that RFPs are still useful? How to make them the most useful? What's your opinion on that topic?
So, I have a lot. It's really hard for me to, and really bad given that I do this, to come up with like a concise take on this. I think when RFPs are most effective, they are specific and they serve a process of self-discovery and they have some sense of when you are saying no, right?
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
That it's like that the scope is really clear. Like we are going to accomplish these 4 goals, for example, and we're definitely not going to try to do this other thing because that is too much. It's either too much time or too much budget or too much whatever. So, which is, I think, actually in website and maybe CRM stuff, it's a lot easier to do that than my colleagues who are doing strategic communications RFPs or like public affairs RFPs. Like that's probably a lot harder. It's like you can actually attempt to measure the scope for a website RFP in a way that you can't in other places.
For sure.
So I think that the work that you do to develop the RFP is really, really useful. I push my clients to be very kitchen sinky, which is honestly a choice and not always the best one. I got to be really clear because you can get lost between the forest and the trees. I always want to tell firms, I always want to give firms enough information that they know where the problems are, right? Like this is the thing that might cost you a lot of time or a lot of money. And I don't want you to be surprised, but it is possible. And it's a little bit of a push-pull to make sure that you're really talking about the strategy and the templates. I don't need 15 pages. I need a pattern system that can create all these use cases and outcomes, for example. So I do think that RFPs are useful in terms of helping internal teams understand what they are asking someone outside to do. I do think that RFPs are very time consuming for organizations to respond to. And so at least when I issue RFPs, I try to put budgets in and talk to firms before we do the issue to say, this is what we're looking at. This is, here are the things that are fixed. Here are the things that we don't quite know yet. Here's maybe like a range of what we're thinking about in terms of the budget. Is there anything here that you're not clear about? Like, is there anything here on a top level that you would want to know? Because then that helps us kind of craft an RFP. And then there's a Q&A period in that so people can ask questions. But But the goal really is to try to be as honest as we can be in a process like that. And so I truly believe that the value for organizations is in the work that you put in.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I also think that the goal is to vet a small number of respondents. As time goes on, I invite fewer and fewer people. One firm told me it was about $10,000 to respond to an RFP in terms of lost staff time. And
staff time for an RFP response?
Staff time for an RFP response. I hope I'm not violating. I mean, it seems like a reasonable, it's not like an out of this world kind of thing.
No. Yeah.
When you think about it, because you need like 3 or 4 people to kind of break down the scope and put it together and make everything pretty. And then if you're invited to a finalist interview, that's like 5 people for an hour and a half, like smiling on the screen.
Yeah, I guess it
so
does.
I mean, it adds up. So the question really is like, can you do anything are there things you could do adjacent to the RFP process to limit the number of people you make go through that very specific dog and pony show? Well, yeah, probably. It's true.
Yeah. It's true from our perspective. We do respond to some RFPs and others we don't. And it really does come down to the quality of the RFP for us. I mean, how much information is in there? How many unknowns are there? If the more unknowns there are in RFP, the less likely we're going to put the time and energy into it because we don't know. But if it is really specific and we know this is exactly in our wheelhouse, we'll spend the time and energy to do it. But so that makes a lot of sense. The other thing that I find that sometimes people who, by the way, they should absolutely hire you to do their RFP. If they're thinking about it, oh my God, because we see an entire range, right? Some of them are great, some of them aren't. One thing we do see is people leaving out information about any integrations that need to happen. So we did respond to an RP once, and as a membership organization, and they knew that they needed people to be able to log in to the website, but they didn't know what the CRM was, where the account information was for each of the members, and so we could put a proposal together, but we don't really, and they had trouble finding out because it was an old vendor and they didn't know, and blah blah blah. So in the end, we ended up winning the project with a huge range for the CRM integration. And it turns out it's using a CRM called Atlas. It used to be called Atlas. I don't know if you know. It was not a major one, and you can't really integrate it. It's an older system, legacy system. Doesn't really have many integration tools. There's an API for single sign-on, but that's it. There's no other integrations that are possible. And so it was funny. It was sort of one of those things where, I think and it's not the organization's fault. They don't know, how are they supposed to know that you're supposed to investigate this stuff? But that's kind of what I'm saying, hire somebody like Emily and she'll help you work out what the investigation needs to be so you can get information in there and get the best responses. Yeah, for sure.
It's really hard. And it's interesting you mention sort of the association aspect of this, because I think that like foundations for public facing websites, the flagship foundation website usually has very few integrations, right? There's like a application management system, there's email. Oftentimes if they're external, if they're like extranets for grantees or participants in a program, those are often kind of siloed off to the side. They're not frequently integrated into the mothership. But for associations, man, you're learning, you're registering for conferences, you have multiple areas where you are convening in groups. And that is an area where I feel like associations can really kind of struggle to kind of keep all of that together. And it is the simplification of all of those systems is not in my wheelhouse. You and I were fortunate. I think you still work with Debbie McCann at W Foresight. She's really good at those sort of system things. But I do think that the one thing that I notice with the nonprofits, and I don't mean to call this out as a criticism, but as a reality that you can run into, is that it is because technology is something that you don't see and hold in your hands all the time, it can become really easy to not think about it as physical infrastructure the same way you think about a house or a car or something like that.
Totally.
You and I met, I cannot let this go by without telling this story, because an agency who will not be named told a mutual client of ours who will not be named that they were going to stop supporting their aging Joomla instance in 10 days.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh yeah, we told you that before. And I'm sure that they did, but that did not stick. And then 2.5 months later, it turned out that the place that was hosting this instance was going to stop supporting the technology architecture that this Joomla website was hosted on. I have never gotten such a frantic phone call on a federal holiday. And, I think your employee, CJ, like, I really think I need to talk to someone right now. These are going to go down in 10 days.
You're like, it's winter break. It's winter break. Why you call it? Yeah, what's happening?
It's like, what's going on? But it just goes to show that, first of all, like, you saved my client's life then, because that website was going to go down and go down hard. If you did not move it, like, no one wants to, like, 2-minute drill move their website to a new host in 10 days to keep it alive.
Right.
You did, and thank you. But second of all, it is unfortunately an example of how hard it is to be a nonprofit and to budget for things that can go wrong that you had no idea. Like,
totally.
Like, they had no idea this could happen to them.
How are they supposed to know? How are they supposed to know? Our clients are not techies. I mean, they sort of listen to what people say, and they're that was a crazy situation. I was shocked about. I mean, that is so. Yeah. It is bizarre that the previous people were like, well, can't do anything about it. You're going down in 10 days, and it's crazy.
Yeah. But they were like, oh, go look on Upwork for a Joomla developer. I mean,
yep.
Like, I've like soft landed volunteer projects with more integrity than that. Yeah. But, anyway, there are times I have failed as a consultant. Like, we all have, like,
of course.
Nobody is as bad as the worst outcome of the weirdest decision they've made, but it's just, but it is one of those things that you really feel for nonprofits. They're busy saving the world. And then, like, they got, like, taken to their knees by a PHP upgrade that they weren't expecting. Like, what?
Yeah.
What does that mean? Like, what just happened to me? Anyway, I'm really far afield from what I'm sure was your next question. Completely different.
No, that's great, man. That's what this is supposed to be, right? This happened with my last episode too. We're like, shoot, we've gotten about 2% of what we wanted to talk about, but that's okay. That just means we'll do it again. Totally. We were talking about RFPs, but I do also, we have very few minutes left, but I do also want to just touch on this triage thing that you do, just because I think it's so unique and something that I haven't really found other people who sort of say that's part of what they do. But can you talk about that a little bit? You have, maybe is it an accident that you've become a bit of a specialist in digging organizations out? Or is this something you wanted to focus on? No,
this is an accident. This is every once in a while, every once in a while things don't work out. And sometimes it's situations that I've been a part of that don't work out. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I just kind of get a call out of the blue that things don't work out. Mm-hmm. And it is, I've also been like the in-house client where things haven't gone the way that you thought they would. Mm-hmm. And I am always reminded that I have less tolerance for mess in projects than almost anyone else. And that I kind of breathe and we'll get through this, and it's like important to hear all those things. But every once in a while, you just run into a situation where the firm you hire maybe doesn't have the level of it's usually not always technical chops, but that there's like some core thing that they're not getting. I feel like this happens now, but I feel like we went through a time where firms would have like mass exoduses, and then it's like, there really isn't anyone on the other end of the phone who can kind of do the things that you need to do. Or people are just like they're losing attention on a project. And so they need to kind of port over from someone else. And, I feel like the first skill for something like that is just kind of listening. And then like painstakingly sort of saying, okay, well, what do you have? And how far did you get? And do you have access to this? And some of it, feels a little bit like some of it feels a little bit like negotiating with someone under emotional distress. I don't know if this might be apocryphal, but I think it's actually true. When
Hmm.
I moved to Oak Park, most of the friends that I made on Twitter. I don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
Probably says something about my social skills. But I made friends
That
with
is
this
not true.
guy.
That is not true. You,
I made friends
you are
with a
very
guy
active.
who's like an engineer sometimes, like does like program systems related to nuclear power plants. And for a while, he could tell you
Huh.
the life of like radiation in the bodies of the wild animals that were around the
Oh,
power plant.
Chernobyl? Yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah, like how long, like how much exposure until you can't eat that squirrel? I don't know. It was like crazy. And I was just like, and he, at one point, he said to me, I was just like, wow, programming nuclear systems must be really hard. He's like, nothing is as stressful as working on website projects.
Dude, we got, oh my gosh, that is great. I'm
I
going to
just sat
absolutely
there
use
and
that.
I was like, I felt very validated. But on the
Yeah.
other hand, it's that thing we were talking about with the stakeholders and like, but people have like, you really invest yourself into these projects. And when things
Mhm.
aren't working out, it isn't just that it isn't the mismatch between like a set of goals on a piece of paper and a set of deliverables in a code base. It's I'm not happy with you.
Mhm.
And because
Mhm.
it's really like no one is a robot, right?
Mhm.
Everybody who does development for nonprofits cares on a level that is
Yeah.
probably not different from banking systems, but it has the potential to feel really personal. And
Yeah.
so one of the things that you try to do is you try to find someone who can be like a calm, neutral,
Mhm.
non-reactive, patient listener as you're doing the extraction process.
Mhm.
Where it's like if we're
Gotcha.
transferring a project from like organization A to organization B, you kind of want to find that neutral person who can kind of ask those kind questions about, okay, well, where are things now? And
Mhm.
it does help to do this work with people who can pay out, who can give some type of consolation prize when you're like basically terminating a relationship with someone. It
I
makes it a
gotcha.
lot easier because there's a lot of assets that you need back. And so
Yeah.
you want to respect the fact that, well, if this project didn't work out, you still need their cooperation. Maybe you need to transfer. Hopefully you're not transferring domain names back. Hopefully you have a better system for that. But you do want that code base in progress. You
For
do want
sure.
the design work that's happened. You want to make
Yeah.
sure that you get all that back. And most agencies I work with really care in the deliverables about when they hand that over because it's often their last protection and getting paid on project
It,
completion.
it's true. It's true. And you need the art, the designs, but you also need the source files. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
do as a developer, it doesn't do us any good if we just have a JPEG of what it's supposed to look like. You know, we have to have we don't have to, but it is so much easier and faster and cheaper to develop if you have those source files. So yeah, you need to get that information, that stuff for sure. That makes sense.
Yeah. And so you just really need to, and I have to be honest, like negotiation is not my strength, but I try to keep track of like who are my solid, cool as a cucumber negotiators out in the
Huh.
universe. You can kind of
Interesting. Yeah,
help
sure.
do this. Yeah, no, I'm like a live wire. I'm like, you did what? So which is like not the attitude you have when you're basically like in the corner with somebody who um you want their cooperation as you're extracting them from a project that's not working out.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting you talk about the emotional component because I do feel, I do feel like doing this work, we are, I'm surrounded by a lot of people who do web development for, small business or large business or enterprise or whatever. And a lot of the success of or failure of those projects is more objective. Do you know what I mean? Like you can, okay, if we're going to redesign the homepage, we're going to increase the conversions to our lead form, because we're selling shoes and we want people to buy the shoes. You can
Yeah.
just calculate that. I mean, you can calculate what the landing rate is. You can calculate what the conversion rate is. For nonprofits, it's not like that. There, first of all, there you can do some measurement and you should have some goals. Absolutely, no question. But it's often not measurable in like dollars or clicks, right? Like we did a website for NYS Teaches, which is an organization that helps deliver resources to the families of homeless students in the public school system in New York City. So if you don't have a home, don't have an address, that means you can't mail things to the parents. Can't mail them because they don't have a mailing address. So there has to be a digital hub where they can get things like the assessment reports, and the teachers can get guides for how to handle homeless children and stuff. And like you can measure how many times they get downloaded, but like there's no dollars associated with that. You know what I mean? Like there's no way to calculate, well, that was worth $10,000. You know what I mean? It's more just how we're all kind of feeling about it. And so in a way, like there's a lot more emotional connection to like the end goal in a way that like dollars is more objective, I guess, is kind of what I'm saying. So maybe that's not why, but I do find a lot of emotional attachment to a lot of the projects we do.
No, I think that's really true. I mean, there are times working on pharmaceutical and consumer product websites is very heavily regulated.
Yes.
You have to pass every word you do by a multidisciplinary committee, and you have to have citations for everything. And so it's very expensive and stressful to kind of meet the rigor of the standard. But it's the KPIs and the goals are super simple. Did you like drive more prescriptions? Did you drive more retention? Did you drive more coupons? Like it's so like the product's like selling more, it's selling less, right? Super clear. Well, you know, when you work with a foundation, for example, my clients, it's like, you know, having more people apply, is that necessarily better? No, because the number of dollars that you have to give out does not change. And so the question is, if you are, if you're driving untargeted traffic to someone, that doesn't necessarily, that's not good for the people who are being driven to the application form. It's certainly not good for the foundation staff who probably did not get into the business to turn people down all the time.
Right.
So there's that, like there's like a quality metric to the traffic that you're looking at. And then it's like, does this information actually allow people to make change in their policy or their practice or their guidance in order to change? And that's like all like impossible to measure, super impossible. And
but you can measure little parts and you're extrapolating, and you're absolutely right.
And there are definitely like, I work with clients who do like larger scale sort of like perception measurements. And once I had a client who like found a white paper on a website and included it as an embedded link in a New York Times story. And I was like, hey, my work here is done. But those like are unicorns in terms of what reasonably can be expected to happen. And so, I think because the lack of measurement in some of the things we do makes it really difficult to triage competing opinions. And nonprofits are consensus-driven organizations, which means that a lot of people are around to have opinions. And so it does make sort of that work operate on a different set of human relations than, say, my pharmaceutical work.
Oh, I totally agree. Totally agree. And then on top of it, you know, there's a lot of our clients who, you know, want to go out of business in a way. I mean, it's hard to say it that way, but we have we work with an organization called Climate Advocacy Lab, right? Like they help climate activists exchange information for best practices on changing people's minds and furthering the anti-climate agenda. So anti-climate change agenda, I guess. But best thing in the world would be that if climate change stopped.
Oh,
and no one would go to the website anymore. That would be awesome. No, that's not happening, you know, but.
Right. And I think that definitely like when you look at direct service nonprofits, like the ideal world is when they have engineered themselves out of existence.
Totally.
And oftentimes it is a credit to the people that you and I get to work with every day that they are tackling these, like we used to call them big, hairy, audacious goals, but these enormous things like ending homelessness or like ending child poverty or all of those things. In my volunteer time, I do very, very concrete things like making sandwiches and like folding clothing, because in the nonprofit tech side, you are constantly you're creating a web page or a web system that you're hoping someone will look at and they'll take some information from, and then they will go out into their own context and make a change that will eventually result in more good and less bad.
Yeah.
It's very, very like it's very diffuse change, and it doesn't have it's like rolling the boulder just a little bit more quickly so that it can get downhill and make some type of like path of change or something.
Totally.
It is not concrete. And today it's not more prescriptions, more coupons, more names.
It's hard. It's hard because the direct feedback is not there. And yet it's so necessary. You know, I mean, it's so necessary and such a blessing that people do it, you know, but yeah, the immediate feedback is not often not there, which makes it so hard. Listen, I could talk to you about this stuff forever. I'm slightly afraid because I don't know much about this podcasting technology yet. I don't know if meeting is just going to automatically end at some point. So we should, but I do want to ask you though, my last question is typically, is there anything that I didn't ask you that we should cover, which I feel like there's a ton of stuff I didn't ask you that we should cover. I'm going to have you back on and we got to do this again because this is so much fun and we could talk about 10 trillion things. For now, just tell me, you know, if people are more interested in learning about you and what you do, where can they go? Where can they find you? How do they get in touch with you?
So I have a website, egculbertson.com. I have an email address. I have a couple of email addresses there. I'm on LinkedIn as well. And feel free to call me, or my phone number's on the website too. Talking to me about your thorny website problem is always free. I am happy to talk. And surprisingly enough, a lot of people, when I talk to them, that I do not say to them, you should hire me. I usually say to them, think about some other thing, or I'll tell them, you actually should think about hiring this other person. I feel like I have a lot of conversations that end with, you should hire this other person. I will be, if I can't help you, I promise I will be the first person to tell you that.
Yeah, you can trust that. She's awesome. She's awesome.
Oh.
Very trustworthy, easy to work with, fun, integrative, full of integrity. Anyway, can't say enough great things about working with you. And thank you for talking. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it. And we'll do it again. We'll do it again for sure.
Ben, thank you so much. And thank you for taking that frantic phone call from my mother-in-law's closet about my Joomla website going away. It was December 28th and I didn't know what was going to happen. And so I'm super grateful for like saving my clients behind multiple times over that time period.
Well, man, I'm so glad you called because first of all, I got to know you, but also they've been great clients since. I mean, what a great organization. I probably shouldn't say that. We unfortunately can't really say their name.
They are a great organization.
I don't want to embarrass them for the terrible situation they were somehow in.
Yes, but Organization X, the best association in the world. We can't name. So, all right, take care. Thank you so much for having me. This has been a blast.
Great times. Thank you so much. All right,
thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Nonprofit Thrive podcast. We'll see you next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.